The Nazis, they wanted to keep their mass murders inside the death camps in Eastern Europe a secret. Yet, they failed to keep it a secret. When the concentration camps were liberated by either the Western Allies or the Soviets, its horrible, ugly truth was already well known to the outside world. This obviously raises the question, how did the outside world learn about the death camps? How did the secret of the Nazis leak out? Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new to this channel, I'm Stefan, I'm a Dutch history teacher. I produce history videos for you, and if you find that interesting, consider subscribing. Also hit that notification bell. This here is a sensitive topic for many people and also for this platform. If you want to support me so I can make more videos about this sensitive topic, please consider becoming a patron. You can also donate via PayPal. Thank you. When 1942 came around, already 1 million Jews had been shot in Eastern Europe by the Einsatzgruppe. These shootings started as soon as the Germans launched their conquest of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, which kicked off on the 22nd of June 1941. Now do notice that mass shootings already occurred after the Nazis conquered Poland, where Polish Jews and Poles were shot by these Einsatzgruppe. But the shootings proved to be ineffective. It was time consuming, it costed ammunition, and it was psychologically exhausting for those who had to carry out the executions. Gas fans were introduced, but also these were time consuming. In January 1942, the Wannsee Conference took place. Here, Nazi leaders came together to discuss how to solve the so-called Jewish question. It was decided that the Jews were to be deported to death camps, and there they would be gassed. After this, their bodies would be cremated. The Jews were no longer deported to the ghettos, but to the extermination camps, such as Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz-Birkenau, located in German-occupied Poland. In the previous video, I talked about what the Germans exactly knew about the death camps. The whole operation involved too many people to keep it a secret. Soldiers, they witnessed it. Railwaymen took care of wagons filled with deportees, and also government officials who had to take care of the empty apartments of the Jews that were deported. All these people may have simultaneously hidden behind their functionally circumscribed roles, yet pass their little nuggets of knowledge into the general circulation of information. Most of the Germans knew about the killings that took place in the East, yet talking about it became a taboo. It created a sense of knowing without knowing, and if people after the war claimed they didn't know, it was perhaps due to their efforts not to know or not wanting to know. Exact details and numbers remained vague, and this gave room to rumors, and as a result of this, errors crept in. So within the German Reich, the secret of the death camps was not so much of a secret. But how did the outside world learn about it? And I'm not talking about the full story that was revealed when the camps were liberated in 1945, but before. How did information about the mass murders in the camps reach the outside world before the war was over? Himmler believed the Shoah had to be a secret. Reason for this was pragmatic. In order to keep the operation going in an orderly way, the end goal, mass murder, needed to be a secret. Victims shouldn't be aware of their fate because they could panic or revolt. The same goes for bystanders. If neighbors and friends of victims knew what was going to happen to their acquaintances, they could offer help. Politicians of satellite states or occupied areas would be more willing to cooperate with labor commitment than mass killings. Especially the unrest that was caused during the euthanasia program, codenamed Aktion T4, the systematic murder of institutionalized people with disabilities, needed to be avoided. In short, the Nazis believed that the more innocent expectations would lead to the widest cooperation. In order to keep it a secret, the murders were committed in Eastern Europe, away from the eyes of the German people and the people living in German-occupied Western Europe. The Germans one day hoped to rally for the National Socialist cause. German-occupied Eastern Europe was a moral and legal no-man's land where the existing state structures were destroyed, most of the elite was murdered, and the remaining population lived under harsh rule. Second, the Germans tried to keep the group of perpetrators as small as possible. That's also why the shootings in Eastern Europe were so ineffective. These became some kind of a horrific show where soldiers came to watch it with their own eyes. Some kind of execution tourists, in some case even taking pictures, which they then brought home when they were on leave. The death camps, however, were better concealed from the outside world. A part of the murders was outsourced to foreign collaborators, such as Troniki, which consisted for a large part of Ukrainians. Because of the language barrier, there was a big chance their words would not reach Germany. And then there was also the Sonderkommandos. These were work units composed of prisoners, usually Jews, who were forced to aid with the disposal of gas chamber victims. Eventually, they themselves would be killed too. Because of this, not too many Germans were directly involved in the killings. Take, for example, the death camp Belzec. There, 600,000 Jews were murdered and only 30 Germans were working. Third, there was a duty of silence. People were forbidden to talk about it. An SS officer who showed off his photo collection of murdered Jews was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Fourth, the Germans wrote as little as possible on paper regarding their plans of extermination. Many instructions were spoken instead of written on paper. If something was written on paper, it was destroyed as soon as possible. From the 30 copies of the Wannsee Conference, only one has been found. Also, the Nazis made use of euphemisms to hide their crimes. These euphemisms often had to change because it was too well known what these euphemisms meant. And because of all this, denialists and revisionists today make their claims. I try to keep an eye on the comments, but if you're an avid commenter and you read much of the comments, you know that there, unfortunately, are many denialists and revisionists out there. I'm on it. Fifth, the perpetrators, they spread misinformation. The reason for deportation was labor, and the reason why whole families were moved was because then they didn't have to separate. Sometimes deportees were forced to write reassuring letters home. The International Red Cross insisted on visiting the camps, and when they were finally allowed to visit one of the camps, this was in the summer of 1944, they were directed to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was cleaned and painted before the Red Cross made its visit, and many of the inmates were deported to Auschwitz before the Red Cross came. Sixth, the perpetrators made efforts to destroy all the evidence. In December 1942, Himmler had already emphasized that the bodies needed to be buried or burned. And in the summer of 1943, Standartenführer Paul Blobel was ordered to dig up the bodies near Kiev, where the Babinjar massacre had taken place. And all these bodies needed to be dug up and burned. This didn't happen quick enough, and often the Red Army stumbled upon smoldering pyres. Majdanek was captured almost fully intact, and when the Red Army liberated Auschwitz, early 1945, only parts of it were destroyed. Inmates were still alive. But when that happened, the world outside already knew of the death camps. How? SS chief Heinrich Himmler was aware of the fact that the operation never could be kept a secret for long. Therefore, he wanted it to be done as quick as possible. The secret leaked out sooner than he expected. The mass executions in Poland and Eastern Europe never were a secret because many soldiers witnessed the killings themselves, took these stories home, and even took photographs. Non-Jews living in the area saw their neighbors being rounded up, taken away to a force, and then shots were heard. often for hours or days on end. Via family relations, the church, pre-war political networks and resistance groups, the information was spread. Some of these networks reached abroad. The Polish government in exile reported in August 1941 6,000 Jews in Eastern Europe were shot. A Swiss correspondent from the Jewish Telegraph Agency reported that in a Ukrainian city, only 6,000 of the 50,000 Jews were still alive. Towards the end of November 1941, they were well aware of the mass murder that had taken place at Babi Jar. Despite the knowledge, what wasn't known that these killing campaigns were part of a much larger campaign to wipe out all the Jews of Eastern Europe. Towards the end of May 1942, an overview was presented. The Polish government in exile received a report from a Jewish socialist organization named Bund, active in German-occupied Poland and the Baltics. In the report, tens of mass executions were named, and it was stated that the Germans were planning to kill all the Jews in Eastern Europe and that already 700,000 had been killed. 1 month later, a British soldier who had spent time in the Warsaw Ghetto managed to escape, and several weeks later he managed to reach Portugal. He told the British government about the German plans. In British smaller circles, this was already known because 3 Polish mathematicians cracked the German Enigma code, and so they had received reports about the plans of the Germans. Yet the British didn't publicize this because they were afraid that the Germans would then know that they had cracked their Enigma code. Back in the autumn of 1941, the German Jews were reported. The American embassy in Berlin, the US at that time wasn't at war with Germany yet, reported that it was said that the German Jews were put to work in Eastern Europe. Knowledge of the true Nazi intentions needed contacts on higher levels. A German entrepreneur, Eduard Schulte, owned mines near Auschwitz and held contact with Gauleiter Fritz Bart. Bart had inspected gas chambers with Himmler in the summer of 1942. 1 week later, Schulte traveled to Switzerland and told a Jewish business partner Hitler wanted to wipe out the European Jews with Zyklon B. This revelation reached Gerhart Riegner, then Secretary of World Jewish Congress in Geneva, who in August 1942 sent a telegram to the British and American embassies, which became known as a Riegner telegram, receiving alarming report stating that in the Führer's headquarters a plan had been discussed and is under consideration, according to which all Jews in countries occupied or controlled by Germany, numbering 3.5 to 4 million, should, after deportation and concentration in the East, be at one blow exterminated in order to resolve once and for all the Jewish question in Europe. Action is reported to be planned for the autumn. Ways of execution are still being discussed, including the use of prussic acid. We transmit this information with all the necessary reservation, as exactitude cannot be confirmed by us. Our informant is reported to have close connections with the highest German authorities, and his reports are generally reliable. Please inform and consult New York. After several months, US diplomats had gathered data, and in November 1942, American Rabbi Stephen Samuel Weiss gave a press conference that US Foreign Affairs had confirmed European Jews were deported to the East to be murdered there, and already 2 million had been killed. At the same time, the Polish government in exile released a report similar in scope. It was a summary brought by Jan Karski. Disguised as a Ukrainian policeman, he had visited the Warsaw and Izbica ghettos. He had reported that Himmler had ordered to kill at least half of the Polish Jews before the end of 1942, and that at least 1 million were dead already. Around the same time, the Jewish Agency in Palestine also received a report which was based on Jews that had managed to flee Eastern Europe. And they also confirmed what was going on in Eastern Europe. By the end of 1942, it was well known what was going on with the Jews in Eastern Europe. There was a murderous campaign going on, yet the exact details about methods and numbers that remained unclear. This had to do with the Nazi confidentiality, but there was talking. Auschwitz commander Rudolf Huss complained that the SS men couldn't kept quiet. One of these SS men was an officer named Kurt Gerstein. He had witnessed how Jews from Lviv were being gassed. On his way back to Berlin, he shared a cabin with a Swedish diplomat. He told him what he had seen, and he urged the Swedish diplomat to tell the world. The report written by the Swedish diplomat was buried by the Swedish government. Gerstein reached out to the Catholic Church and the Swiss legation, but all in vain. He also contacted his father, a retired judge, who remained unmoved. And even those who lived near the death camps and didn't see the gas chambers, the penetrating smell of burning bodies was hard to ignore. Over the course of 1943, more and more reports about the death camps reached the outside world. A big part of these were released by the Polish government in exile. There was Witold Pilecki, who infiltrated Auschwitz and managed to escape to share information. In April 1944, 2 Slovak Jews escaped from Auschwitz. Their testimonies became part of the Auschwitz Protocols, an extensive and detailed report. Early 1945, Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army. But by that time, the world already knew. But if the Allies knew about what was going on in the death camps, why didn't they bomb the death camps? And how did the Allied press respond to all these reports? There is much more to cover. Big shout out to my patrons and a special thanks to Connor, Philip Jordan, Jakob Musland, Nick Terranova, Haley Berry, Mark Littlehill, Janusz Jozinkiewi, Joanne, Justin Chabel, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Barcic, Susana Di Bella, John Beach, Luis Bergiera, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, and Mike West. If you want to know what the Germans knew exactly of what happened to the Jews in the East, click right here. Well, thank you for watching, and please feel free to share this video. Never forget.